Welcome to the Medic Side Hustle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shubhendu Kulshreshtha, an executive coach and emergency physician, helping clinicians like you make medicine your side hustle. I also author the impactful Clinician micro newsletter and a side hustle readiness quiz taken by over 350 clinicians. So do join us. In each episode, we sit down with an inspiring guest who's redefined their career, turning their strengths and experience into something greater. We'll dig into their journey and draw out their career roadmap, finding crucial decision making points that we can all learn from. In the second half, I'll hand over the hosting to my guest and let them ask whatever questions or talk about whatever topics matter the most to them. Live audience, you'll get a chance to ask us your questions at the end, so please keep putting them in the comments with the letter Q at the beginning so it's easier for us to find. And I'm going to quickly introduce our guest for today, Rachael Lemon. Rachael comes from a background in pharmacy for the last 30 years, but oh boy, she's had quite a journey since then. She's now an executive and leadership coach, founder of the Empower Her magazine, a change leader, a writer, a speaker, and also a domestic abuse advocate. Rachael, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks. Like you, I'm enjoying the sunshine. It's like spring is on the way.
Absolutely. It's a good time of the day. I want to hear more about what you do, so I'm going to hand over to you for a few seconds to tell us about yourself.
Okay, so my career, as you said, my career started in pharmacy. Originally, I wanted to be a forensic scientist. It didn't. That career didn't really exist back then. So we're talking like 1980 something, and so I thought pharmacy was the next best thing. I thought I'll learn all about the toxicology and stuff, and then those people that are poisoned and they find the bodies, I'll be able to help them figure out who did it, the Columbo style thing. But I actually enjoyed pharmacy, so I kind of stayed in that as my career. My career started in hospital pharmacy, so obviously it was patient focused from the start, very different than community pharmacy, where you're kind of dispensing all the time. Even as a student, I kind of worked on the wards directly with patients. I think I've probably been lucky that I've always worked in quite progressive hospitals where we weren't just sticking labels on boxes, where we were like pushing boundaries and creating new services. So that's probably been quite helpful in my career, because even as a student, I had my own wards. Obviously, I was supervised. I wasn't quite unleashed on the world, but yeah, I was able to go out and do wards and like see patients on the wards rather than be in a dispensary all day. So I guess compared to some people where, they start off and they have to do their sort of time in the dispensary before they're let out, I was quite blessed with having good mentors and good leadership. Who I actually had the youngest chief pharmacist in the country at the time, who was in his 30s, which back then was unheard of. Most chief pharmacists were 60 and kind of kicking retirement. Yeah, I think that helped as well, having somebody who was, again, leading the way and breaking boundaries. So I worked in pharmacy, hospital pharmacy primarily. I worked in community pharmacy, primary care, done lots of cross-sector working and multidisciplinary team working, which has been, again, brilliant for my career, I think. And I would recommend anybody to collaborate and work with people outside of their first primary clinical profession, because it just gives us such a broader perspective. We also had the social services working with our team on some of the projects, which again, that's such a huge boundary in healthcare, isn't it? The fact that the social budget and the healthcare budget are separate pots. It's like, why are we still having that conversation? But it's a huge factor, because we know that social factors often affect people's health more than actual diseases.
Yeah. And the actual delivery of care spans across all of them, and we try to label different bits.
Yeah, and like so many patients would repeatedly come into hospital, and it wouldn't be necessarily they had an underlying chronic health condition, but they weren't necessarily acutely ill. They would come in, like one patient came in every Monday because it was fish and chips, and he would come into the admissions ward, and I did a special project looking at our high cost, high turnover patients. And when I spent some time with him, so I did a pioneering project where I'd go out to follow the patients through their journey from A&E to the admissions ward to a ward if they were admitted, and then back out into their home. and follow them through to see what was going on, and things like that. You know, the fact that after talking to him, realizing that, you know, Monday was fish and chip day and he was lonely, and actually, you know, the day centre had been closed down, so he knew if he rang 999 at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, he would be on that ward, and somebody had to assess him. Even if they sent him home later, he would still get his fish and chips for lunch. So I think the whole social side of how we like deal with medicine, like the holistic side, has always been important to me, because I think it's never as black and white as we've got this illness and that's the only thing going on.
That's amazing. So very quickly, I'm hearing that you went from just studying and learning and doing pharmacy to being part of a team that was already sort of pushing the boundaries, and then started to recognize like the bigger picture of the system and what's going on and implementing those. But I'm really curious, you said you almost went into toxicology, and then you thought pharmacy as a perspective just sort of still helped in that lens. What drew you to sort of the drugs and toxicology bit of things?
So like I said, I wanted to do forensic science. Seen a few too many like murder, gruesome type things, and again the old Columbo movies where he just turned up, solved the murder, and put the clues together. And like I said, it wasn't a recognised career back then. You could work for Scotland Yard as a civilian. But when I went and applied, I got an interview, but they said I was too young. I was only 16 when I applied, and they were like, you can't move to London on your own from the countryside, from a little village, and survive in London. It just won't happen. Apply again in a few years' time. And by that time, I'd already gone to college, started my pharmacy journey. I did my degree. I did physiology, pharmacology, biochemistry, and health studies, which basically was social policy. So back then it was what they called a combined honours degree. Although chemistry was my favourite subject at school, biochemistry was not what I expected. And
there's not many fans of biochemistry.
Yeah, I love animals. I really don't agree with, like, it was, you know, like you're in the lab chopping up bits of animal, testing drugs on them, etc. It just wasn't aligned with me. So luckily, I dropped that from my subjects. I was able to drop it and pick up more on the health and social policy side, which is probably why all throughout my career I've always like been part of my professional leadership body and done like national leadership work, because of that interest and acknowledgement that actually to drive real change we have to do it at a policy level. So while we can individually help patients' lives, you know, out on the wards, etc., to drive the change that's needed to make that difference, we've actually got to get up. We've got to get a seat at the table. We've got to get up there in London, you know, Department of Health, NHS England, etc. You've got to be involved in those meetings to make an impact. So
you started off really wanting to solve problems and figure out what's going on underneath, and do that from like a forensic perspective, and then you went into pharmacy, and then you found yourself solving problems in healthcare. Was there a part in between where you kind of felt, oh, I'm completely doing the wrong thing, this is not where I wanted to be at all? Did you have that moment?
No, not really. I think I realised that probably before I was 30, I realised that I couldn't, you know, that there were lots of problems in healthcare, systemic problems, and that actually, how do you make an impact? How do you make that change? And that was by putting myself forward for these national roles and, you know, working parties and different projects where we could influence that change. And that quite often in healthcare, people moan about, oh, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, but nobody's prepared to do anything about it. Or there's a belief that it's always been like this, we can't create change. And I think, you know, it is chronically underfunded. I remember my first day, I was pretty much told, like, welcome to the hospital. By the way, you'll have to work weekends when we tell you. You can't go home at 5 o'clock just because your job finishes then. We expect you to stay late and you won't get paid for it. It's part of, you've signed up for life, basically. This is what you get. So I think obviously we are brought into that culture where it's kind of like an understanding that, you know, this isn't a 9 to 5 job. You can't just go home because your shift's finished. If people need you, and that's more important than you. And I think that's driven us to the state where we need coaches like us now who are helping people navigate burnout and exhaustion and compassion fatigue, and this kind of realization that being a doctor, being a pharmacist, being a nurse, being whatever allied health profession you're in shouldn't mean that you aren't entitled to your own life. And I think that's how many of us started our career, was like, this is it's not a career, it's not a job, it's a vocation. It's this is who you are. It's not what you do, it's who you are. And I think that is kind of one of those things, isn't it, that actually it's inherent in the system. We're told right from day one. And I'm sure, as a junior doctor, you would have had the same, like, you're on call 24/7.
Yeah.
You can't go out and get drunk because we might call you at 2:00 in the morning, have your big pager on all the time. I remember my pager went off in a nightclub once. I wasn't on call, but I was like a good 10 miles from the hospital.
Wow.
And everyone was like, you're beeping. And I was like, oh God, I'd obviously just forgotten to turn it off. But I was like, how have they even managed to get the signal that far?
It goes really far. It goes really, really.
Yeah,
I think it's
there's things
FM.
that you think about that, like, okay, even things like, I'm not sure. So when I was in my management role and on the leadership board of my hospital, in my hospital, like things like you had to live within so many miles of the hospital and be able to drive there within 20 minutes. So even things like where you lived
were controlled and determined by
things you
your
had
job.
to take into consideration, because it was like you can't be a leader of your department if you're not accessible, if you can't get here quick enough, so if you wanted to live, so I worked in Bournemouth at the time, if I wanted to live in somewhere out in the countryside and it took me an hour to get there, that would have affected my ability to do my role, because I wouldn't have been able to get in on time, a major incident, for example. So there's so many different nuances that we don't take into consideration.
Tell us about that journey into leadership. So it sounds like you were very much driven by this want to make a change and impact, and you realized that getting to those ranks would help you do that. What was the big challenge along the way? I guess a lot of our listeners might want to know, was there any sort of additional degree or qualifications and things that helped you get there?
Yeah, so I think, and a lot of people probably find the same in healthcare. So I knew I wanted to do a leadership role. I asked my then chief pharmacist if I could do this course. And he was like, you can't do it because you're not in the role. And I was like, so how can I position myself to be in the role if I haven't got the qualification that it says on the person spec I need? So I chose to fund my own leadership course through a local university. And I negotiated with my chief pharmacist that if I took, so it was obviously like day release, so quite a lot of my annual leave. So I negotiated with him that I took half of my annual leave and he gave me half of the days. While I actually funded the course. So I did manage to negotiate with him a little bit. And ironically, back then, leadership roles weren't commonplace. It was kind of like you had to wait till someone retired for a role to come up.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a role for me in my department, but I'd kind of positioned myself in a place where if one came up, I had the right experience, etc., to apply for it. I also did something which back then it was under the NHS innovation kind of umbrella. Helen Bevan, who's a change agent, she ran a course, something called the NHS Healthcare Radicals. So it was for like healthcare rebels. Obviously, you can't imagine why I found that exciting. So I did that as well, and I did that in my own time. And that was a good turning point. That was where people from all professions within healthcare came together and we talked about rocking the boat, not tipping it over, but having those kind of like conversations and challenging the status quo and creating ripples of change without having to constantly reinvent the wheel, but actually being able to say, look, just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean that we should carry on doing it this way. And again, that led to, I guess it gave me the confidence that I wasn't alone. I wasn't just somebody within my department who was being disruptive and a pain in the arse for my boss. I was actually, we need change agents within the NHS, and we need them more than ever now, I would argue. but it was meeting people that all wanted the same thing. They all wanted to drive change for the right reason. So I think, again, that network of people that I met doing that broadened up my horizons. And it also kind of, so when I would suggest changes or like new ideas for services, which sometimes were quite radical, if I was on my own doing that, people would just be like, oh God, there she goes again, off on one of her, like, but actually having other people in other hospital trusts doing the same thing meant we had a community to go back to and say, right, okay, I'm struggling to persuade my boss to invest in this, etc. And what happened for me was I actually got approached by somebody outside of the hospital who wanted me to go and work for them. So I got seconded to do a project which was totally unique at the time, which was working with a geriatrician, a pharmacist. We had a social care manager who was social services basically. We had a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist.
Okay.
And we had an admin assistant, which was an actual dream because, they're like gold dust to keep us all coordinated. So we did a project there which looked at people through their whole holistic healthcare journey and their needs, and being able to say, so if I went out to somebody's home on a pharmacy visit, but actually I went out and they, like they didn't have any food, for example, instead of me having to wait weeks to get a social services referral, I could ring Karen, the social worker. She could come and she could put a care package in place straight away, like the same day. And the same with like physio or OT. If I went out to see somebody and they couldn't get out of their chair, I could ring the OT assistant. She'd come out, do an assessment, bring round the equipment. And so that project was, we won awards for that project. But as in typical NHS style, they were like, this is great, but we're not going to fund it. And it was partly funded by pharma. So back then, so we're talking probably early 90s, pharma gave us £20,000 to put into that project. And then the primary care trust, as it was back then, and the hospital, they all jointly funded the cost of the staff to do the project. So again, quite pioneering at the time, because people's budgets, and it's like everyone's pot, they're very protective of their pot of money. And it's like, we can only use our money for this. So by putting funds together, again, that helped me moving forward in my career and being more creative in looking at how we could employ different people and make sure we had the right people doing the right job. So when we had a shortage of pharmacists, for example, we were able to say, could a nurse perhaps do this role? Or the same, like if we had a vacant doctor's positions, I was able to say, like, could we train a pharmacist prescriber to deliver that service? Like what's the actual thing that you need delivered versus the person that you're trying to recruit? And I think, again, when we work in silos within medicine, whether it's, in hospital or primary care, actually we sometimes forget that it's about the actual tasks, not necessarily about the person. And so by being creative like that, because we would have vacancies for doctors could be like 2 years sometimes. So like I would look at our NHS jobs and go, right, okay, so how could we as pharmacy department, how could we contribute to that? How can we put a case forward where we could solve part of the problem? And also looking at how, other departments could help us.
Absolutely.
Pharmacy has always been like the poor relation in healthcare. Like, if you read the Daily Mail, it's the whole NHS is run by doctors and nurses. Like nobody else, just doctors and nurses.
No one else exists. Like,
no disrespect.
Who's cooking the food? Who's pushing the trolleys?
But, we need our porters. We need the people in the canteen that feed you when you've been on shift for 12 hours, and also feed the patients because they get a bit hungry. Estates, departments, people who come and fix that light bulb that's flickering, and the fire brigade on call for when the doctor's mess catch on fire daily. Can you remember the old toast machines?
All the toasters.
Yeah. Where you put it just goes through.
It's a whole thing. And we just
the doctor gets bleeped
that
away, and next thing you know, the doctor's mess is on fire. Yeah, it's very much about. It was, again, even things like wanting to create a new service, a new ward, having the right players at the table. Like we said, estates, porters. Like, okay, we open a new ward, but that means we need a porter, because how are those patients going to get pushed to and from the scanners, for example. So making sure that we actually had the big picture rather
Yeah.
than just.
And I really like quality improvement methodology for doing this. Like, I think oftentimes people find projects as being massive and they don't really know how to get started, how to wrap their hands around it. But it's actually not that complicated. There is a methodology to the madness, and there's a stepwise process that people can follow. And then there's the joy and the fun of using your creativity to find which solution works best at the end of it as well. And you're right, like the more you step out of your dedicated clinical patient facing role, the more opportunities you have to do this and the more opportunities you have to collaborate as well. So just give us a quick.
Asking the patients as well, because when we design services, quite often we design them for us and not for the patients. And that's something I find is a huge thing still to this day, is that these service redesigns, they don't actually, nobody speaks to the patients till it's already designed. And it's like, well, actually, that's who we're actually doing it for.
Yeah, the number of places where we bring patients back to clinic, drive about 2 hours away just to say, oh, you're okay, thanks for coming, see you later, and replacing that with.
And I think COVID has helped to a certain extent, because now doctors have realised that actually it's okay to give somebody results, even if they're bad results, like on the phone. Because,
over the phone, yeah.
Like my consultant, obviously I've got chronic illness, my consultant's in London, but I don't want to drive 4.5 hours to be told, like, we've got your scan back and it's got a bit worse, or he can tell me that on the phone. The result is still going to be the result. And actually, it's nicer for me to get it at home, because I can just distract myself by watching Netflix or something. If it's a bad result and I don't want to process it, I haven't then got to drive home for 4.5 hours upset, thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen next? I can actually just forget about it for a little while and then come back to it later.
It's as simple as just asking our patients what they want, what would they prefer.
Yeah, and it saves time as well for doctors, doesn't it? Because, like, I'm pretty sure for you, like, if you speak to someone on the phone, the conversation's much quicker than if they're in the room with you.
Yes and no. I guess from the emergency medicine perspective, I find it much quicker to see them in the emergency department. But yes, I guess
ED's
there's
a little
lots
bit different, isn't it? If you want to kind of, if you're in a clinic, an outpatient type clinic, do you get patients come back to ED? Like, so in the ED, in the last hospital I worked, we had a sort of clinic where people could come back within the next few days and see the same doctor, potentially. Do you have that?
No. I think most EDs have gotten rid of it.
Just to try and prevent readmissions.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a service that we pioneered, and that again, we had pharmacy involvement in that, which was quite good, because it was like, obviously readmissions affect your targets, don't they? And then you get in trouble and you've got to answer to the board and tell them why. And so we looked at creative ways of, like, how can we look at these people that come in and out of A&E constantly. And I'm sure you have got patients that you know they're going to come in.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's the third Friday of the month, it's a full moon, I know that I'm going to see Mr. X today. You get to predict, don't you, those patterns?
Yeah. But so you moved into leadership, and just tell us what your sort of milestones and checkpoints were in your leadership journey, and what then prompted you to change careers and get to where you are now.
So I started off, I volunteered for my professional leadership body, first of all, editing their journal, so that somebody cajoled me at a conference and she was like, oh, we need an editor. And, like, back then, I don't think I'd even ever sent an email, like, so long ago.
Okay.
And, like, I was like, all right, I've got to do this whole thing on, and it was paper. It was like an A4, 2 sides of paper when I started, like, literally printed off and then folded up, put in an envelope. And so while I did that, it turned into a 40-page magazine, which is something I'm proud of. I did that for like 17 years. While I was in that role, I was then chosen for the Royal Pharmaceutical Society's Hospital Pharmacist Group, which back then, I make it sound like I'm 100, but back then, sort of like, I was the only woman. My first board meeting, I was the only woman.
Wow.
I was a good 20 odd years younger than all the old chief pharmacists.
Wow.
And obviously, like, a bit of a, although I'm an introvert, I was still a bit of a rebel. I still had opinions on things and quite radical ideas about how we could do things differently.
Can you remember what days that sort of have stuck with you in memory?
Yeah, well, the first meeting I went to, I was told that I could speak, but what I said wouldn't be put in the minutes.
Wow.
So Yeah, I know. So that's the one thing that stuck with me. But by my second meeting, they decided I could be included. So yeah, it was.
What did you say that made them change their minds?
I'm not sure. I think because I tend to like observe. So I tend to like read the room and see the different characters. And there were some quite strong characters in there. And we had a community pharmacist, even though it's a hospital pharmacist group, we had a community pharmacist who was very vocal about his ideas, very loud. And then we had a couple of the chief pharmacists, again, who had a lot to say. And then there was a few chief pharmacists who were quite quiet, but obviously knew their stuff. And so I think kind of like learning to read the room and know, it took me a little while to learn, but that I didn't have to say something about everything. So that when I did have something to say, people would actually listen and go, all right, she's speaking now, so it must be important. And I think when you're new to a board, like at executive board level, you kind of feel a bit of a pressure. Like you get this big long agenda before and you're like, right, okay, I've got to give them my opinion on every single thing. I've got to make sure that I prove my worth. And actually, so like realizing that I didn't have to do that. And actually that diluted my message when I needed to say something. That was kind of an important learning curve. And from there, it goes on there for about 10 years. I also went forward for PM Healthcare, it's called now, which was pharmacy management at the time. They advertised for regional advisory board leaders, and that was a publication created by someone who's now one of my sort of favourite mentors. But he was a teacher. He created a publication for pharmacy leaders because there wasn't anything, nothing existed. So being on that board as well taught me a lot. And obviously, again, in my sort of editorial writing kind of journey, which has always been a passion of mine, writing, etc. So through that, we did training events and different things. So I learned a lot through that. So when the Royal Pharmaceutical Society split from a regulator, they had these new boards, pharmacy boards, and I decided bravely to put myself forwards for election. And I got elected onto the board. And I remember going against the president of my other professional leadership body and thinking, there's no way I'm going to get voted on. Like, this guy's president, he's really popular. Like, there was the two of us against each other.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty shocked when I got on to the board.
Wow.
But that was a really sort of that was a turning point for the pharmacy profession in general. You know, we'd just gone from being regulated and registered by the same body to split. So that was pivotal in pharmacy's history. So being on that board was something that I learnt a lot, and that's when I started to do more work with the Department of Health, with NHS England, NHS Health Education England. They all change their names so frequently. And I also did a lot of different projects. I did a lot of informatics and health technology type projects at a leadership level, so a lot about prescribing, etc. And we still haven't got there. We still haven't got a single patient record, have we? We still haven't got electronic patient records and e-prescribing in hospitals as standards.
Yeah.
I did some stuff with the Law Commission around the regulation of healthcare professionals, which was again eye-opening. And a lot of patients that were at those meetings for patient group bodies, they said if somebody had apologised, they would not have prosecuted.
Yeah.
And that was probably around it was not long after the Harold Shipman type time. So it was interesting to know that actually what people really wanted, and sort of duty of candour had just come in, but doctors were still scared to say sorry, because it was like, if you say sorry, you're admitting you've done something wrong. And so trying to implement that kind of mindset shift was a pretty big task, you know, to say like, it's okay, you are human, like we make mistakes. And actually what patient bodies are telling us is that if you just said, I'm really sorry, I made a mistake, they would not take us to court. And the NHS is very court adverse. Like, it's their biggest fear. It's constantly, are we going to be sued? Are we going to go to a tribunal, etc.? So actually the very thing they were afraid of could have been stopped by simple apologies. which is
I have
ironic.
I have a few questions for you. So, as someone who's nowhere near a board position or an executive position, and probably a lot of my colleagues and perhaps a lot of the listeners here might see that as a very prestigious position to be in, and a lot of responsibility and a lot of power. There's a few questions that are coming to my mind, and I guess the first one that probably a lot of people want to know is it a lucrative position to have? Like, is that a reason to be striving to get to that board level?
So if you mean lucrative in terms of money,
Hmm.
I would say not.
Okay.
Not directly, but then
Right.
it does give you the skill set and confidence, etc., to start your own business, for example. So when I started my own business, I already was recognized as a leader in my field
Hmm.
because of the work that I'd done nationally. So I
Okay.
didn't have to go out there and pitch myself as I'm just doing this thing now. I already had a lot of people who I'd worked with, who were prepared to support me, and
Hmm.
people that surprised me. So, like, we were talking about being a woman in leadership and how you're actually the minority.
Yeah.
But actually, surprisingly, the people that came forward, and when I said I want to start my own business, the people that said, like, we're going to help you, were men.
Wow.
And some of them were people that, like, at the time, I thought they just thought I was a troublesome little redhead pain in the butt, But actually, when they were like, we admire what you've done and we want to support you. So
Wow. How did that feel for you?
I mean, it was obviously, I fully appreciate it and it was great. I think I felt a bit disappointed that some of the women that I thought would be allies weren't,
Hmm.
and that was a bit of a wake up call. But I also think it was a testament to the fact that you can be yourself and lead as yourself, and people might disagree with you, but it
Hmm.
doesn't mean they don't respect you.
Wow. I think that's an important
Yeah,
distinction there.
so I think I see a lot of people, and I work with women, especially people who've gone onto boards, and they feel like they've got to change who they are to fit in. And I think I'm probably incapable of that. So I haven't ever been in that position where I have to behave in a certain way. And I'm not saying I
No.
behaved disruptively in a bad way, but I've always been just driven by my passion and purpose rather than a set of rules. So
Okay.
potentially, like I said, I thought that they might have been like, oh, she's a bit of a pain in the butt. She's coming out with all this stuff. It's a bit radical. She's questioning everything we say, but actually, yeah, people respect that. And also, so they might be very, very different in their views to you. But
Hmm.
if people are genuine, they don't mind you questioning things, and they are open to different new ideas. And I'm
And I
not saying
guess,
everybody was like that. Some of the old white boys club were very stuck in their ways, and there was no convincing them otherwise. And some of the women, and I think that's the things. I think because women have to fight so hard to get into those positions, there are a very big proportion of women that are like, I earned this, I'm not going to help anybody else. And it's very much why I started my business and why I started Empower Her, was
hmm,
because I don't think we need to be like that as women. I think we need to
absolutely.
be bringing other people up with us,
Absolutely.
and we
And
need
I want to
to
hear more,
be, yeah, we
more
need to
about
have the
that.
attitude of, I think you asked me about people, like you said, people earlier on in their careers, like you being on a board. I think I would say, like, don't let your lack of experience put you off, because they need your voices. They need fresh voices. And so,
Hmm.
like, if you take the GMC, for example, or the BMA, like, they absolutely need fresh young voices. Like the report
And
that's just come out this week shows, like, the leadership is stuck. It's not, the last report was 5 years ago. The one that's published this week, there's no real movement
hmm,
for women or for people that aren't white. So I think, it's really important to put yourselves forward. And
when
interestingly,
would be the right time for somebody to sort of search for these opportunities?
I think the opportunity, so most board positions are run for 2 to 3 years. So on a rolling basis. So, like, I would say every year your board, boards in your professional leadership bodies will be having places. Also, the regulators as well
Hmm.
have positions. So they could be advisory boards. They could be like fitness to practice, for example. There's all different boards that you could get onto. I think just deciding what change you want to make and then figuring out where's the best place, which is the best table, where can I sit to make that change.
So
And
starting
also
with the
for getting board positions, I think, again, think outside of your direct profession. So like there's always lay seats on all boards have got to have lay seats. So like, for example, pharmacy would benefit from we had a lawyer on our board. So, you know, don't always think I can only be on a board of doctors. If you want to get that board experience, you might be able to get it outside of, you know, your direct profession.
That is so insightful, and I think something I probably wouldn't have considered. I would have been looking in my own professional bodies and the people that I come in contact with. But clearly, there's value in other places as well to bring a fresh perspective, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and so like hospital trust boards, patient groups are always looking for like doctors. You know,
Yeah,
like patient groups now are big business, and they're, you know, every disease has got a patient group. If they're a charity and they've got board of directors, they're always going to have spaces for people who aren't not just patients.
yeah,
So there's
wow,
there's lots of different ways to get board experience. Even like, you know, for mums, if we talk about women, you know, even doing the PTA, your dads, you know, that parent teacher association, that gives you that little bit of experience at managing money, managing policies. If you feel like you need a bit of a boost before you put yourself forward for a, you know, full-on professional leadership role.
yeah,
I think the other thing as well I'd say is most of them board meetings you can go and watch. Like they will have a
okay,
closed part, you know, where it's private, but most professional leadership bodies should have the option for you to go and sit in a board meeting and see what happens.
okay,
So I don't know how well they advertise it, but like for us, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society boards, sometimes we would have like 10 or 12 people come and just sit and observe.
wow,
So
okay,
that's something as well that maybe would help give people that confidence boost, because you could go and think, oh, actually, look, it's easy. I can sit there and say my piece, because it's not as bad, you know, it's not as
yeah,
high powered as we think it is, you know, it's just a sort of think tank. It's probably the election part that puts a lot of people off, isn't it? It's the standing for election, having to put yourself out there and sell yourself.
But I guess what I also heard was if you're purpose driven, if you've got a mission, if you've got something that you want to make a difference to, then this is kind of like the stepping stone to help you do that rather than a testing ground for who you are.
Yeah, I think I personally, I mean, there are people that get on boards for the status, you know, they're like,
Mm,
I want to be a CEO and I've got the title, and they don't want to do the work. And there are those
yeah,
people that exist. But I think that if you have got a passion and a purpose and you're driven by that and you want to make a change, and
mm,
it might be for your profession as well as for patients. It doesn't, or, you know, it could be both. Ultimately, the happier we are in our profession and the more supported we are, the outcomes for patients are always going to be better, aren't they?
yeah,
Because if we look at
absolutely.
like the burnout statistics, etc., if 80% of NHS staff are burnt out and 75% are highly stressed, according to the HSE, then how can any of us be great at what we do if we're carrying around that burden of exhaustion? So yeah, I think
Absolutely.
again, it's like there's only so much change we can make at a local level. And it doesn't mean that you can't make change at a local level. And it doesn't mean you can't. There are lots of people doing great work. People I've spoken to, quite a few doctors this year and pharmacists who want to start local groups for like cardiovascular disease or diabetes. Or so again, change doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a big push title. It can be something that impacts your community,
Yeah,
that you've put yourself out there and, you know, just created change. And
yeah,
the thing about LinkedIn that I try to encourage people to do is like share it, because there's probably someone else thinking, oh, that'd be a good idea, but I don't think I've got the skills to do it. And actually, we find like all of us that have ever got into these positions have started from nothing. We've just been like, I've got this idea, and not all ideas work out. And so, like you talk about your
mm,
side hustle, the side hustle, you know, I'm sure
yeah,
you're learning. Like, not everything we think is a great idea is going to work.
absolutely.
It's not going to be profitable. But if we don't try, we'll never know.
Yeah, and if we don't ask for help, if you don't put the idea out there, then nobody knows about it. Nobody can support you in making it actually happen and making it a reality.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing
Yeah.
this year, I don't know about you, is like really right from the beginning of the year is so much more collaboration.
Yes.
And I
100%.
think, like, you know, because I don't, and this isn't an egotistical thing, I don't see other coaches as competition. Not because I don't think they're better than me. Some of them will be.
Yeah,
I
but
think
we're
there's
all
always going to be someone more experienced, etc. I just don't look at it like that. I'm like, this is what I do. The right people will want to work with me. Excited by the fact there's so much collaboration. And I'm excited by the fact
absolutely.
that we can help amplify each other's voices rather than spending time, wasting time going, oh, so when you do a business course, they tell you, don't they, you've got to do competitor research, etc. And that part for me has always been like, no, I'm not doing it because I don't care. And like I said, it's not in an arrogant way. It's in a, if I spend time worrying about what other people are doing, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
That's exactly it.
And I also think, I don't know about you, but obviously I'll breathe in a minute, but it's important for me to be able to refer people.
Yes.
So like, I'm not the right coach for everybody. Like I coach, I mentor, mine's a fusion of both. I've been a teacher, I'm a trained facilitator. So my style of coaching is very much holistic. Some people are pure coaches and they will ask people questions and get them to find the answers themselves. Some of the people I work with, they need more than that sometimes. They're in a where they're stuck. They've got a big board meeting the next day, or they've got a big project to do, or they've got a member of staff that needs performance management, and they haven't got the headspace to sit and work through 10 questions that get them to the place that I know they can get to. They need someone to come up with a strategy that they can go and do it straight away. And so, again, different people are in different places. I'm not a therapist. And I think coaches are, you know, there's people that say they're a coach and then they try to give people therapy. And I think that's quite dangerous. I think we have to recognise what we are and what we aren't. And so for me, having people in my network that I can refer people to is more important than worrying about competition.
Absolutely.
And just being able to say, like, you know, like if somebody really wants to start a second business as a doctor, yes, I can help people with ideas, etc. But like the how to do it stuff, yes, I can do that, but that's not the stuff that lights me up.
Yeah.
So I would then refer that person on. So like, I'm a strategist, I'm an ideas person. If someone wants the A to Z of how to do it, and like a roadmap and like the stuff you do, I'd be saying, like, you're probably better off going to work with this person now. I can help you figure out what you want to do. And then you need someone who's got the bandwidth to go through step by step and get you there.
Yeah.
And I do more mindset work, I guess, around that, feeling confident enough and etc.
Yeah.
Whereas some people have, you know, different approach, don't they? And I think that's important too, is like recognizing our own limits.
Yeah, and I think
And
it makes you a
also-
better coach, because if you're truly dedicated to helping this person, helping the client, and there's aspects that you can't help them with, it makes you better if you've got somebody you can send them towards, or knowing what you're good at helping them with and what you're not shows your real dedication to what you're serving them with.
Yeah, because just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Yes.
So like, I can coach people on careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could coach somebody on how to do their CV, how to be the best applicant in the job selection process, etc. But that's not why I started my coaching business. And I think that's another thing, isn't it? When it comes back to our values, it's very easy to get swept up into this. There's a lot of coaches for coaches, and I can see why, because it's kind of an easier way to make money.
Absolutely.
But actually, there's a lot of people selling a dream without selling them the realities of it. It's hard work. If you've got to be a marketer, an admin assistant, you've got to do your finances.
Everything all at once, yeah.
You've got to do all of this stuff that you didn't have to do when you had a day job. Is actually, so when people sell it, and I get loads of people, I expect you do, who are like, I want to be a coach like you, is about being, again, having an honest conversation with them. Like actually, if you need money, then keep working for a couple of days a week, or 2 or 3 days a week. So you haven't then got to worry about how you're going to pay your mortgage if you don't get any clients that month, or you aren't in a situation where you've got to work with people you don't like.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse, is there, than like having a call with someone and you don't quite gel, or they've got a different attitude to you, like, yes, you can probably coach them, but do you want to? Does it make you feel
Exactly.
happy?
And that's the whole point of doing something on your own and running your own business. Take us back to when you decided that you were going to leave a fully employed or a leadership role and do your own business, and what were sort of the pros and cons of that decision?
So I guess that decision was taken out of my hands.
Okay.
I had, well, the podcast I did earlier, you would have heard. So I had a new boss, and she was like, you can take a demotion or leave. I don't care. It's your choice.
Wow.
And obviously, a bit more in depth, we won't go into it here, but I decided, obviously, I didn't accept a demotion.
Mm.
And I didn't leave without a fight. I took it to a tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me, that process took about a year.
Right.
But that gave me a financial kind of stability to be able to choose what I did next.
Right.
And I already had work lined up. So when you talk about what was the benefit of me being on a leadership board outside of my day job, it meant I already had people that valued my expertise.
Mm.
So I didn't have to look for a job or apply for a job. I was just like, I'm going freelance. And I already had people asking me to do work for them before I was legally allowed to, because with the whole process of a tribunal, I couldn't actually take up other employment until I'd officially been sacked.
Right.
I say sacked, but dismissed, whatever we want to call it. And again, I think it's important to talk about that fact that younger me would have thought getting sacked was like the worst thing that could ever happen to them, like so shameful. But actually, it's all a political minefield, and I had to kind of play the game of like letting this person sack me to win my tribunal. And so fortunately, because I'd been in leadership, I understood the process, and I think a lot of people probably wouldn't. And the NHS relies on the fact that people won't push back if they're bullied out of their job.
Wow.
I think a lot of people just leave, and it is stressful, tribunal, it's not easy. But luckily I had very good mentorship and people supporting me through that and saying like, you can do this, and giving me sound advice. So it didn't give me a mental breakdown. I was just like, no, I know what I'm worth. I know that I'm good at my job, and I'm not just going to back down and be bullied out of it.
Wow.
So I think that was important. And I think, again, that helps me when I'm helping people who are in that situation to talk through their options.
Yeah.
And realise that you don't have to just do what someone tells you just because they want you to. Because there's a lot of demotion. When we restructure in the NHS, they're always trying to save money. And there's always a pushback to try and get people to take a lower paid, still do the same work, but for a lower grade, which isn't fair, is it? We don't get paid enough as it is.
No.
So I think at that point, I kind of did decide that I felt a bit let down by the NHS because I'd worked for them for years, but I still worked, I subcontracted, so I still taught pharmacy for NHS funded students. So I didn't leave entirely. And I did some work for PM Healthcare, organising medical training events, etc., which was quite good. I did that for a year. It's quite exciting. So that was like getting doctors, keynote speakers, putting events on all over the country. And doing different sides of like healthcare, outside of being in a hospital for 12 hours a day.
Okay.
And it was actually quite enlightening, like literally like enlightening to see like daylight and to be able to work, like if it was sunny, to be able to say, oh, actually, I'm going to do my work tonight and have the day off and go to the beach. Like all of these things that I never did in the NHS. It was like, wow, I can live in a different way. And I think once I had that freedom of like working for myself, I guess I became pretty unemployable, really, because it was
what was some of the early work that you were doing? So you were seen for your expertise when you were in your NHS role, and when you opened your own business and went freelance, what were some of the things that people came to you for?
So I had already done my advanced and specialist practice with teaching. So I was teaching pharmacy students, the modern apprenticeships, and also doing consultancy work and some writing.
Okay.
So things like writing training programs for receptionists in GP surgeries, for example.
Okay.
So like where they screen prescriptions, writing procedures for them, like if the bloods come back and they are this, then you need to refer that to the doctor. So those kind of projects that were a little bit different.
Wow.
So yeah, like I said, it opened up a whole new world, really. in terms of, and I loved teaching, but teaching became quite bureaucratic as well, because it was like, we had Ofsted, we had EFSA, we had the GPHC, that's the pharmacy regulator, and then we also had the City and Guilds or Pearson's, who were like this educational standards. So we had all these reports we had to write for each student, and never actually got enough time to spend with the students.
Okay.
So for me, it became a bit like my NHS job, where in the last year of working in the NHS, I spent all day, every day, firefighting at bed meetings, trying to get patients out to clear beds for more patients to come in, knowing that the same patients would be back in the next day. And I would say literally my last year when I was working in my role in the NHS, that was what I spent doing. Our first bed meeting was at 8 o'clock. We had another one at 10. We had another one at 1. We had another one at 3 and another one at 5.
Wow.
And then emergency was, and it literally felt like I would spend all of my days in meetings or like chasing KPIs, you know, and then having to present our department's KPIs to the board and justifying why we hadn't met them. And also juggling. So like on one day we would be told you've got to cut 30% of your staffing budget, but you've got to provide a 7-day-a-week service.
Do the
and
same
then
thing,
the next
but
day
cheaper.
it would be like, oh, the Department of Health have given us this pot of money that we can get £500,000, but we've got to have a business case and you've got to have it in by tomorrow morning. So you'd be up till midnight writing a business case to get your share of the money. And it was just crazy. So it's like, yeah, one day you've got to cut your staff, the next day you can get some money to recruit some new ones. And it was just juggling all the time. And I think at that point I had considered whether or not I would stay in pharmacy leadership. I actually loved the excitement of emergency medicine.
Okay.
And we had a directorate level role come up, which was managing acute and urgent care. But that was obviously very target driven and very full on. And I kind of liked the thought of the excitement of it. But I also knew again that it wouldn't be very patient focused. So I had got to the point in my career where it got as far as I could in pharmacy. And the next strategic move would be to move into the management corridor.
Right.
Which, as we called it, you know, like the senior management corridor.
Yeah.
And get one of those like jobs running they were called directorates back then.
Wow.
Yeah, doing that. And I actually had a mentor who was outside of pharmacy again. And I chose her because she was the complete opposite of me. She was really fierce. And I actually saw her like make guys cry.
Wow.
In our like quarterly performance meetings and stuff. Like if they hadn't met their target, she was really fierce. But I thought that I could learn from someone who was the opposite of me. I didn't want to be like her, but I just felt like I wanted to be challenged.
Okay.
And so I got sponsored to do the first ever NHS Leadership Academy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I was one of the first people to do that they're like postgraduate type qualification. And funny enough, I just spoke to a guy on LinkedIn, he's a surgeon, and we did that course together.
Oh, wow.
And that was one of the first things where it was multi-professionals. So we had like pharmacy, ambulance services, GPs, consultant surgeons, all these IT, all these different healthcare professionals in the same room.
Okay.
And working on projects together. So yeah, it was interesting to catch up with him. He works for the CQC now. So yeah, again. So yeah, it was that's the power of LinkedIn, isn't it?
Yeah, just putting yourself out there and meeting people that.
I was like, yeah, did you do that? Yeah, we did that course, didn't we? Because he was at I was in Bournemouth and he was in Portsmouth.
Okay.
So yeah, we were a distance apart, but yeah, it's interesting to see like what people have gone on to do since that course.
Yeah.
And obviously now the NHS Leadership Academy exists, which you're a coach and I'm a coach for, and most of their courses are free and accessible to everybody. So I think as well, like you were saying about leadership, like where I paid for my own leadership course.
Yeah.
I always say to people, if they want a course, why not do the free one with the NHS Leadership Academy? I do think that it teaches you to lead the way the NHS wants you to, rather than the way the NHS needs. But it is a good foundation and it is free because, you know, these courses cost a lot of money, don't they? You know, like you're talking a good few £1,000s for a decent course.
And the opportunities out there. It's never been easy to find the opportunity and education that you're looking for. I think the courage to take that step and take that leap and look outside is often harder to find than the knowledge is now.
Yeah, I think as well, people, even like, you can get mentorship and coaching for the NHS Leadership Academy. And even if it's a one-off problem, like a thing a lot of people come to me with is they've just started a leadership role. They might have been promoted within the existing team. So they've gone from being friends to being the bad guy. And there's that kind of psychological adjustment of how do I get people to do what I need them to do, and for them to recognise that I'm now in charge and to respect my decisions, and how to navigate that. That's quite a common one. And also when you're in that new leadership position, you haven't got the autonomy to do what you want. You've still got a leader telling you what to do. And so you're caught in the middle. You've got like all these targets you've got to hit. Yeah, and then you've got your team who like, oh, she used to be one of us, now she's in their office, and so you've got that kind of adjustment. And there isn't really support for people when they go into new leadership roles, I think, in the NHS. It's kind of like you go from being a clinician to suddenly having to lead services, make tough decisions, maybe performance manage people, deal with constant complaints, because you get complaints from patients, you get complaints from staff, you get complaints from service users. And dealing with all of that is quite tough if you haven't got anyone to mentor you and support you, because it's quite hard going, isn't it? If you know on a Monday morning you come in, you're going to get 10 people ringing sick, you're going to have complaints because this and this didn't happen at the weekend. You're going to have to change all your rotas.
You don't get trained for any of it. You don't experience much of that beforehand.
Those conversations, like if someone's made a mistake, like a serious error, we can't just pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
We have to look into it, and we have to take it seriously, and we have to look at how did it happen. And I don't believe that anybody intentionally makes an error. I think that it's always like a series of things that contribute to it, and quite often it's lack of training. Like how many people actually get a proper induction in the NHS? Even like day one doctors, like you get the intake March and August. It's like no junior doctors day, but how many of them actually get support? Or they're just like, here's your ward, here's your stethoscope, here's your BNF, there you go, see you later. Like how many people get actual genuine mentorship and somebody that they can go to? Because again, it's tough, isn't it? When your first patient dies, it's tough.
And also, I think that's not really recognized. I think it's just the culture within healthcare that we kind of just learn and do and learn and do and learn and do. We don't really turn and say, oh, can I actually run this by somebody and like talk to somebody to help me through the decision-making process? I think that's
and it's because those conversations that you have to have, whether it's with patients, whether it's with their relatives, and we have to remember, like a lot of people are angry. Like when we give people bad news, some people take it, they're very calm and chilled. Other people will be angry at us because we're not telling them what they want to hear or they need to hear. And so you're in a position where you can often be the villain, and it's never really about you, but it feels personal when you're in the kind of firing line, doesn't it? And I think as well, there's this kind of culture of that we can't be empathetic, that we shouldn't show that we care. And again, like we were saying about how when you start, it's like, you shouldn't be personally involved with your patients, you shouldn't get too involved, etc. And yes, we need boundaries, but why can't we be empathetic? Why can't we be human? If you're dealing with a family and their child's dying of leukemia, I think you'd have to be a pretty narcissistic sociopath to not be affected by that. Like what? It's not wrong to go and cry in the tea room, is it? So when Rachel, you've just had to break that news.
From the outside and from all of your experience, you've probably worked alongside and with a lot of doctors. What's probably one piece of advice that you would give them about their careers and the way they kind of look at their careers?
I think the most important advice for doctors at the moment, and pharmacists as well, and anyone really, is to actually set your own boundaries and be able to stick to them, because the NHS and the situation that it's in, it's always going to be asking more of you. It's easy to say yes, and it's easy to think that we're irreplaceable. And also, just by the nature of us choosing that career, we want to help people. And so we kind of like inherently say yes to everything, but we forget the cost to ourselves or our families.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of doctors who have worked hours and hours. My friend's a pediatric oncologist, and it's cost him his marriage, and he never saw his own children growing up because he was there for his patients and admirably, and he's brilliant at what he does. But I remember having a conversation with him one day, and he was like, shit, my wife wants to leave me because she said, like, I'm there for all these other children, but I'm not there for mine. And so, like, we have to weigh up the cost, like the actual cost to us. We are allowed to be people as well, and we do deserve to have like a life. I think we need to have more part-time roles. And when we say part-time, it's probably still full-time to most careers, but these 60-hour working weeks or more even for junior doctors, they're not acceptable. Why should you have to choose between being a doctor and having a family and spending time with your family?
I like the example you've given, because it's not like the issue that actually at the end matters is the time you take away to spend on things that seem like they don't matter. Like on a day-to-day basis, you might say, like, I've got a dying patient, how can I give up taking care of them to just sit at home with my family and have fun? And it seems you almost feel guilty thinking about it, even just going to the beach with my wife. Like, how can I leave the struggling state of the NHS and all of my colleagues to what they're up to just to have a good life? But that is really the cost that at the end of it leads to things like divorces and issues with your health and everything else.
And then we see, like we're seeing increased suicide rates in doctors, because again, if you do then lose your job or you become unwell, you realize that you are disposable really quickly. And that whole life that you've given your whole life to your career, all of a sudden you don't have any purpose. And I think that's important as well, is realize having a purpose outside of our role, and realizing that our profession we aren't our profession, we are beings in our own right. And so yes, it's a job, yes, it's a passion, but we need to have other things outside of that, because at some point you're going to stop working. And
that's a big difficult point as well, because the whole identity shifts at that point again as well.
So if we attach our identity to being a doctor first, for example, and then we can't practice as a doctor because something happens, then you've got to deal with like two big identity shifts. So like Hannah was on the other day, wasn't she? Hard act to follow, but talking about being diagnosed with an illness that's changed the way she lives. And that's kind of something that happened to me as well, was like, you need to slow down, you can't run around wards 12 hours a day. So if your only identity is I'm a doctor, then when you take that away, you need to have something left. And I think we shouldn't, it's not wrong. This is the thing, isn't it? We're led to believe that it's wrong to want something for you as well.
The number of people that hear me say make medicine your side hustle, and they feel like that's just wrong. Medicine can't be your side hustle, but I think it's got to be a part of who you are.
We look at GPs, like I've spoken to lots of GPs lately, and like they would be better GPs if they only had to work 3 days a week.
Absolutely.
And they could have 2 days a week off. They would be, their patients would be better off, they'd be better off. So where these jobs exist, where there's no flexibility, and I think that's a short-sighted on the NHS, isn't it? It's like full-time or nothing. When actually we should be able to be creative. I always encourage people to, even if the job says full-time, go, right, let's come up with a plan where you go and say to them, this is what I can do, this is what I can bring to you. You'll be lucky to have me. And I'm only doing it 3 days a week, or I'm only doing it 2 days a week. And let's look at the bits of it that I don't want to do and advertise that as a separate job. Or when we talk about promotions, is if there's 2 of you in a department, for example, and you say, right, okay, look at the job description together, pick out the bits you want and apply for it together. And not many people do that, but I think if you've got the balls to do that, I think people will actually suddenly go, okay, actually this is a good idea, I'm getting 2 brains for the price of one. And actually, if one of them's sick, the other one's still going to be there, and selling it as this is a great idea, rather than this is a hassle.
Yeah, so I was talking
So
to the London trainee network yesterday, and I said to them, negotiate beyond your salary. Often there's not much scope for negotiating your salary. If you work less, you're going to get paid equivalently less. But there's so many other things beyond the salary that you can negotiate for, and it's really a matter of lining up your value with what they need and being able to make that a
yeah, so
compelling
things like
pitch.
even an extra day or two's holiday, for example,
Yeah, yeah.
or then paying for you to do a course.
Absolutely. Or paying for your own course and getting them to give you the time off to go do it just the way
Yeah,
you
so
had.
yeah, the things that you can negotiate for, so saying like, okay, where does this job lead me? If I take this job now at this level, what can you do to support me to get to the next stage
Next
that I want
level,
to be at in
exactly.
2 or 3 years' time? Like what training and support can you give me?
Yeah.
I think that's an important question to ask as well, especially in leadership, is when we go for these roles, it's like what mentorship are you going to give me?
Hmm.
And mentorship comes in many different forms, doesn't it? It can be informal,
Yeah.
it can be having an appointed person who's, again, outside of your profession maybe, but has got that leadership experience that can help you.
Yeah.
I do think, I think if we don't ask for things, we won't get them.
Absolutely. And you'd be surprised to find out what you can get when you do ask as well.
Yeah, and I think, again, most people are so surprised when you ask for them, but actually they're like, oh, actually, they'll be, when I was interviewing, and I've done a lot of interviews in my time, I'd be impressed if somebody came with a question that wasn't about how much is the car park going to cost me, how many days holiday do I get a year. If somebody came and asked me something, creative,
Okay.
I'd be more impressed to go, wow, okay, actually, yeah, we haven't done that before, but we could.
Interesting.
Because I don't know if you've done many have you actually interviewed many people, or have you not got to that stage where you're
I've interviewed
involved in
people
recruitment?
not for clinical jobs. I've interviewed them as part of like other societies and events and things.
And quite often people are scared to I always ask people
Most
as
people
well, like,
don't even ask questions. They say, no, thank you very
yeah,
much. Yeah.
I think a big thing as well is to look at the organization's values and ask them, like, these values you've got on your website are great, so you tell me how you actually implement them. So if you say you're inclusive, you say you promote diversity, etc., give me some examples of what that looks like. What's that going to look like for me? So what's that going to look like for me if I'm not white? What's that going to look like for me if I'm disabled? Or
Yeah. That's a really good one. Yeah.
actually grilling them. My kind of attitude is we are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing us.
Absolutely. The last
And
interview
that
I gave,
mindset shift helps people, I
yeah.
think.
Yeah, the last interview I gave, they asked me what project I would do in the next 6 months. And I said to them, well, what priorities does the department have right now? Like, what are your challenges? What are you going through? What are you facing? Because until you're part of the department or wherever you're going to be working, you don't know what that is. And I think the interview is a fantastic place to ask those questions, and we don't use that opportunity enough.
Yeah, and I think if we I saw a doctor today, I think she said she'd applied for 500 jobs.
Wow.
I think as well we can be proactive in terms of like speaking to people before our interviews. Like,
Yeah.
if you've got an interview, go and say, can I come in and spend some time with someone? And like you said, asking those questions before, right? Okay, what's people struggling with? So then when you do get put on the spot and said, how can you change everything for the better? You've got some more ideas already.
Yeah.
Even if it's
Absolutely.
like shadowing someone for like an hour or two and going around the wards with them, for example, you're going to pick up whether this culture is actually what it says it is. And think,
Yeah.
asking like, why did the last person leave? Like, did they leave because it's horrible here, or did they leave because they got a promotion?
Yeah.
That makes a big difference, doesn't it, as to
It does.
why we want to work there. And I think we are in a crap position where doctors are struggling to get jobs, and people might lower their value to accept anything. But I think if we can get into more of a mindset of thinking that people are lucky to have us, that we recognise that we've got a unique skill set and we've got something to offer, that maybe that helps position us as the best candidate, rather than going in and going, oh God, I've already done X amount of interviews. Nobody would. And it's hard, isn't it, to get not get defeated if you've gone for lots of interviews, you haven't got the job. But also ask if you don't get the job, ask for feedback.
Yeah.
And I think it's really poor practice, actually, that most interview panels don't give people feedback. And I'm hearing more and more that most people don't even get a phone call to say they haven't got the job, or
No,
an
not even an email.
even.
They just,
Yeah,
in fact, in the email, they write that after the interview, if you don't hear back from us, then you've not gotten the job. And that's just
which
how
is
they
just
leave it.
lazy, isn't it? It's lazy, and
Yeah.
it's kind of
They're
mean.
justifying it by saying they've got over 1,000 applicants for each position and they don't have the capacity to do that. So,
But they don't. No one interviews 1,000 applicants. Like
no,
most people will interview 10, 20 max.
probably. Yeah.
And if you've got an interview panel of 3 to 4 people, surely you can divide that up and make 5 phone calls each.
Yeah.
And go, thanks for coming to the interview. We were really impressed with this, but unfortunately, and give someone something to work with, so that
Certainly.
next time they've got like a bit of a plan to know where they fell short.
Yeah.
And often, again, so many times in the NHS, I always tell people is they've already decided who they're giving their job to, and the interview is a tick box exercise, so it's never really about you. Quite often they're just doing it because they've got to follow the process.
Exactly.
But they already know in their head who's got that job.
Exactly.
And I think that's, again, it's a practice. Why can't we just be honest? Why have we got to go through this whole rigmarole of saying, actually, we've got to advertise, we've got to interview, knowing damn well that none of those people are going to get the job? And those people that have gone for those jobs, they would have done a presentation, they would have researched.
Worked so hard for it. Yeah, taking time off from work, really like arrange childcare, figured out how to make their life work.
I just think it's like we need to shift that culture. And I think that's the reason why we need this kind of like new style of leadership where we say, okay, just because people have done it that way before, and question it. If we're told to do something and it doesn't align with our values, is actually say, look, why do we have to do this? And sometimes say no. And it might not be popular. Yeah. But after you said no enough times, eventually it'll become easier and people will listen. You know, like I was in that position early on where it was like, we already knew who'd got the job, but we had to do the recruitment process, which was a waste of everybody's time. I got to the point where I was like, okay, so how can we change the policies so that we can actually avoid all of this for everyone's sake?
Could you manage something?
Yeah, so we did. We kind of had a policy where we could advertise internally first,
right?
For a set amount of weeks.
Yeah,
but that saved it going out to a public advert and all those 200, 300, 400.
And I think it makes sense. I think so many companies already do that. So many people already look internally for promotions and internal applicants before looking externally, and we just feel like that's just not a way we can do things, and it feels unfair or not right. But I think it's about challenging
it's
that.
about being honest, isn't it? Yeah. And sometimes internal applicants can cost more to the organisation. So again, equally, you have people that have perhaps stood up and acted in. So you've covered for maternity leave or sick leave. You've done all that extra work thinking you're going to get a promotion. And then somebody new, younger comes in and they give the job to them and you're like, really defeated, and that happens a lot as well. So again, it's around being honest, isn't it? And saying, like, not making people, not dangling the carrot of if you step up and do all this extra work, you're going to get a promotion at the end, knowing damn well that you're not. Again, I think we need more honesty in leadership. And I think when I've done restructuring, for example, and you already know that the board have decided the outcome before you do the consultation, I probably was a bit rebellious. I would be honest with my team and say, look, to be honest, it doesn't matter what we say. They've already decided, which probably didn't do me any favours, but it would have with my team because I respected the fact I could be honest with them.
But again, so good.
Why should we have to lie? Why can't we be honest about things like that? Because then when we do have to implement change, our team are going to be on board. They'll be like, okay, it sucks, but she's been as fair as she can be, or he's been as fair as he can be, rather than making us go through this whole answering consultation questions, pretending that you care about what we think.
There's a better way to do things.
And I think, again, so much money in the NHS is spent on restructuring. I had a client last year and they had KPMG spent £500,000 on a consultancy to save £300,000 worth of jobs, when across London there was like hundreds of vacancies on NHS jobs.
Gosh.
So how can they justify any of that when actually they should have looked at the vacancies and redesigned them? rather than making everybody go through a year of this horrible consultation, worrying about right before Christmas, they started it as well. So people with families were like going into Christmas going, I might lose my job, putting them through all that stress.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, I have not realized, but we've gone way past the hour. This has
I was
been
going to
such
say,
a
we probably have,
fantastic conversation. And I think there's so much more we can dive into. Perhaps we need to do an episode 2 of well into season 2. We should get you back again for another one.
Yeah, and I'll be starting mine again. Obviously, you're going to be writing something for Power. I'm hoping I'm going to make myself relaunch next week on International Women's Day.
Yeah, that'd
I
be
think
fantastic.
That's a really important day to kind of celebrate women. And I've also updated. I've always had men involved, but I've actually updated my mission and vision and the values to explain to people who might not understand why a magazine for women's leadership has got so many men involved. Because some people are like,
that is, I love that.
Oh, it's supposed to be a feminist thing, but I genuinely believe that we all need to work together. Yeah, and it's never been a men versus women thing.
Exactly.
There are men that face the same problems that I faced, the same barriers, like to promotion, like we said, about intersectionality. And if we can all come together
on the mission, that matters a lot more.
Yeah, and I spoke to the last thing I spoke to a guy who was in a really senior role in the NHS, really accomplished. He's got all his master's degrees, etc. And I spoke to him, and I was like, congratulations, etc. And he was really nervous because he's an Asian guy, and he was nervous that people wouldn't accept him, and he's so almost some of the barriers that I faced as a woman, I hadn't realised in my own little world that actually he was facing those same things. I mean, luckily I was able to talk him through some of them, but I think we have to recognise as well that it's definitely not a men versus women thing.
No,
it is around if your face fits and if you are disruptive and you do want to change things, that not everyone's going to like that and not everyone's going to support you.
I'm really looking forward to the magazine and having more people sort of align with that mission and get those clarity around the way we can perceive change and perceive leadership and really help shape the new side of healthcare, I think, in the future.
Yeah, I think, like I said, my whole ethos why I made it was because leadership isn't about a title or a job role. And you were saying about people on boards, there's so many innovators and change makers.
Yes.
Across the globe on LinkedIn, they haven't got a leadership role. They probably never will have. But to me, they are leading the way. They're leading the change and they're creating a new environment for us. And I think that's the important thing. So, titles aren't important. When people write for me, I don't care if they write in Queen's English, whether they've got broken grammar, all of that stuff that we have in traditional like health journals where it's got to be referenced. Obviously, we can't steal people's work, reference it, but it doesn't have to be like Harvard referencing where it's all done. And, I don't want that. I want people to be able to share their stories like in their words without me editing it or censoring it. And I think that's the important thing, isn't it? Giving people a voice.
Absolutely. So thank you for tuning in to Medic Side Hustles, everybody. Our next live podcast will be on the 10th of March with the Dr. Manthan Mehta, who's co-founder and CEO of ICSA.ai. We'll be talking all things digital health and industry careers like management consulting. So join my newsletter to stay updated. The links are in the description and the comments below. If you're wondering whether you're ready to make medicine your side hustle, try my 3-minute quiz in the comments. I hope the conversation sparked some ideas and inspired you to think bigger about your career and your impact. Until next time, stay curious, keep solving big problems, and remember, you have the power to create something extraordinary.